Hey everyone, I'm out here in the garage with the Acura RL once again, and what we're going to be doing today is replacing the brake fluid. So stay tuned. In the last video, we changed out the coolant on the Acura RL. I do the oil changes routinely, so we're just going to kind of step through each one of these fluids and get them changed on this car. There are a couple that are not due for a while, so they may not get done, but what we're going to talk about today is the brake fluid. Now, the brake fluid on this car has not been done since I think about 2013, so it's been quite a while. It should be done every 36 months or 45,000 miles on the Acura RL, and as I said, this hasn't been done for about 7 years. So it is a little bit overdue. Now, the reason why you want to change your brake fluid on your car is because you can build up some moisture in your brake lines and that can rot out your lines, and that's not a good thing when you want to use your brakes to stop your car. So we're going to take care of that today. So let's get into it. Alright, so there is an order to bleeding the brakes on the Acura RL. It starts with the driver's side front, passenger side front, passenger side rear, and then driver's side rear. That's the order. So that's why I have the car up on jack stands in the front. Now you can try putting it on ramps. It makes it a little bit harder to get to the bleed screws, so that's why I don't use ramps. And I'm also going to take the wheels off the front to make it a little bit easier to access the bleeder screws. Alright, so something I do on occasions, I forget to loosen the lug nuts before I get the car up in the air. So you can still get those off with just a regular ratchet and a 19mm socket. So how you do that, or how I do it anyway, just want to position the ratchet so you have a lot of leverage on this side. And then I just hold the tire with my left hand. You don't really have to put much pressure on there, just kind of more to steady yourself than anything. And then just quickly pull this way. Like that. Alright, so what I want to do here is show you what this brake fluid looks like. So you just twist the cap like this. You see it's a little bit yellowish. So we do need to change this. I have been adding some brake fluid over time as I have changed out the brakes in the rear. For example, I did a video on replacing the rear brake calipers, and I actually had to bleed the system at that time. So there is some fresh fluid in the system. We want to just go ahead and evacuate all the old fluid and just put fresh fluid in the system. Alright, so let's talk a little bit about different tools you can use for bleeding brakes. So this is a vacuum style device that I use every once in a while for changing the oil in my cars. I don't really use it as much as I used to. I tend to just drain the oil from underneath the car and do it that way now. So this happens to be a Grill's Garage product. Pretty cool product. I've had it for a number of years now. I can't remember when I bought this, but I've had it for a pretty long time. It's still holding together pretty well. And that comes with this here. This is a hose you can use for bleeding your brake system. And this is a pretty expensive device, I would say, for bleeding brakes. And so you don't really need to buy something this expensive to do this kind of job. Alright, so here's another brake bleeder. This is a pneumatic brake bleeder that I hook up to my air compressor. And I really haven't used this one very much. I think I've used it maybe a couple times. So this is a Grill's Garage product. So you can see right here, this goes over the brake bleeder. And then you just press it like that and it forces the brake fluid out of the system and into this container here. This here is a brake bleeder that I use the most. It's a simple one-man brake bleeder and it has this magnet right here, so I can hang it up out of the way, and I can do this all by myself. I don't have to have a second person inside the car pressing on the brake pedal while I'm bleeding the brakes. So that's why I use this. Very simple, very cheap. I've seen people actually make, their own homemade brake bleeders using like a, like a Mountain Dew bottle or something like that. That works too. But this is what I got. It's pretty cheap. It's like 10 bucks, and this is what I use most of the time. So there's the hose right there. This part actually did not come with it. I took this off of another kit that I bought a long time ago. I think it was like a vacuum kit of some kind. So I just put that over the hose because it fits perfectly over a brake bleed screw. Normally you would use something like this. I can show that here. So something like that. That goes inside the bleed screw. The one thing I always worry about is this popping out as I'm bleeding the brakes. That's why I don't use this very much. And this is a lot more secure. As you see here, I've got the brake fluid up to the max line. I'm going to keep an eye on that as I'm bleeding the brake system. And I'm going to be using Honda .3 brake fluid. Genuine Honda stuff. This is a 32 ounce bottle. This should be enough, I hope. I have 2 bottles just in case. Honda does recommend this, of course. I've used other brake fluids in the past and I haven't had any trouble, but it's always best to use what's recommended by the manufacturer. Okay, so here's the one-man brake bleeder. So we need to find somewhere to hang this, and usually on the knuckle on the side here's a pretty good spot. Make sure it's nice and firm that it's not going to fall. You want to hang it up higher than the bleed screw when you do this. And I'm going to take a 10mm wrench, put that on the bleed screw, and then I'll put my hose on top of that, like so. We'll try it there and see what happens. It may move on us, but I think that's going to be good. Here's where I hung the bleeder on the front passenger side. There's a lot of coating and plastic in the wheel well, so it's really hard to find a good spot to hang it. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and crack this open, and that's counterclockwise. And you may want to put a little bit of PB Blaster or like a Croil on here, some sort of penetrating oil if you have trouble breaking this open. I live in the Pacific Northwest, so it's not a problem here for me, but if you live like in the Rust Belt, this may be a little bit of an issue for you to get this open. So I'll crack that open. Don't have to go too far with it. Usually about one turn's enough. Alright, so what I'm going to do now is go ahead and pump the brake pedal slowly and force the fluid out of the caliper and into that bottle. Do that several times. So at the same time I'm checking the level on the reservoir, I also want to check this bottle because it is very small and it will fill up pretty fast. So I think right now I'm going to go ahead and empty this and close this up. Turn it to the right. To empty the bottle, simply unscrew it and then pour the contents into a separate container. Alright, so I've got the fluid down to the midline. Now I could probably run it a little bit lower. I'm always very paranoid about getting air in the system though. So I'm going to put some brake fluid in there. And I'll just pour that in carefully without having it spill everywhere. Alright, and we'll just continue the process of bleeding the brakes until we see it's clear coming out of that line down there. Alright, so you can see the fluid is really clear now. I'm going to go ahead and close this up. Alright, so I'm going to move to the other side and do that side. And it's identical to this side, so I'm not going to show that on camera. What I'm going to do next is show the rear. So let's continue on. I'm doing the rear wheel now. I did the other side already. I'm just going to talk briefly about this side because it's pretty much the same as the front. Basically all I'm going to talk about is where I put the bottle. That's about right there. So I'm going to go ahead and do this last wheel and that should be it. Pretty tight on that one. Alright, so it looks like this side is done too. Looks pretty clear. Go ahead and close this back up. Dump this out real quick. And I'll pull this off. And the last thing here, I'm going to make sure this is nice and closed up. You don't have to go too tight on that. You want to be careful with that. There is a torque spec. I'll put that on the screen somewhere if I can find it. Here's the rubber cap. So the front brakes don't have, at least one of them doesn't have a rubber cap. I have to go buy that. So that's the rubber cap. That keeps debris out of there. So that's it for bleeding the brakes. And we'll just wrap this up. Alright, so I've bled all 4 wheels, and now what I'm going to do is go ahead and top off the brake fluid. So I've got the car back down on the ground, nice and level. And as you can see, it's nice and clear in there now. I did clean this off a little bit, of course, but it is nice and clear in there. That looks much better. So I have just a little bit of fluid left. I might be able to top this off just with what I have left in this container. So we'll see what happens here. It'll be pretty close. Might have to open the other container. I think we're good there. So basically this job took about 32 ounces of fluid. So just keep that in mind. I still would get 2 bottles of this stuff just in case. Make sure this is connected correctly. There we go. All right, so there you have it. There's a brake bleeding procedure on the Acura RL. And as you saw at the end, I don't know how I got that just perfect with the amount of brake fluid that I had left over. Basically none left over out of 32 ounces. So that's probably about as much as you'll need, is about 32 ounces. But again, I would buy an extra container of brake fluid just in case. And also you saw that I was using a one-man brake bleeder. It's a little bit slow, and if you have multiple cars, you may want to buy a pneumatic brake bleeder instead. That'll get the job done a whole lot faster. So hopefully this information was helpful, and thanks for watching.